Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming out today. Um, at first, if the interpreter wouldn't mind taking a break for a second, and let me see how much people can understand without the interpreter. Obviously, the interpreter is going to be here so that everybody can have an understanding of this lecture. So now, without the interpreter interpreting, some of you may be sitting there wondering what's going on and thinking how you're going to be able to manage without the interpreter. Now, the interpreter isn't solely for me, it's also for the hearing people as well. The interpreter is going to provide equal communication access for both of us, for when I'm signing, and also when you ask me a question, the interpreter will interpret that as well. So try to keep it in the back of your mind that the interpreters are not only for the deaf, they're for both parties as well. Throughout the lecture, I'm going to have a series of questions that I'm asking you. If you could, just go ahead and write them down on a piece of note, and write them down on a note, and we'll discuss those later. Now, there's not going to be any right answers or wrong answers. This whole thing is focusing on a learning experience. There's no way within 1 hour that we'll be able to cover everything in depth. We're basically going to be touching on several different topics, and that way we have a general understanding of them. Now, if you're stuck and completely lost and you have a question, don't be afraid. Go ahead and raise your hand and we'll take care of it at that time. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Some people are afraid to ask questions about certain topics such as sex or anything like that. And some people feel that asking questions about deaf culture is one of those taboo topics as well. But that's not the case here. I'm here specifically for questions. So keep those two things in mind, and whenever you have something, don't be afraid to throw it out there for me. First, we're going to touch on the topic of politically correct terms. A lot of people use different terms such as deaf, hard of hearing, hearing impaired, physically impaired, and things of that nature. The first word that we're going to talk about is the word deaf. Now, I grew up deaf, and it looks like there's a few individuals here. Second one would be hard of hearing. If you're hard of hearing, if you wouldn't mind raising your hand for me, please. Looks like there's no hard of hearing. The third one would be hearing impaired. Raise your hand for this one. Okay, there's a few. The next one would be physical impairment. How many are with this one? Doesn't look like there's any for this one either. Then the last choice would be you just don't know. How many here just don't know? Okay, there's a few. The best answer for this one would be the first one, deaf. Deaf is an all-inclusive term that encompasses ASL, the language, the culture, and everything. It's completely normal to say that one is deaf. It's a very accepted term. So, out of Americans, about 10 to 16% are deaf or hard of hearing or have some kind of hearing loss. The numbers vary between being completely deaf and having a mild hearing loss. About 40,000 Americans are completely deaf. Another question that we often are asked is, many people think that sign language is a universal language. How many people here think that this is true? How many think it's false? Wow, almost everybody here believes that it's false. Sign languages vary in different countries. Each country has its own form of sign language. In America, we have American Sign Language, or it's known as ASL commonly. ASL pertains to its own grammatical information, its own structure, and it encompasses its own nature. Just as in Europe, a student may go there to study their sign language and practice as much as he can to become proficient at it. Even so, here in America, with another language and with sign language, a student has to practice the language and learn it to become proficient at it as well. Each language is different. It would be just as learning another language in a different country. An example of how these languages vary is take the English word run, for example. That can be portrayed in several different ways in ASL. There could be a run in your hose, a running nose, you're running for office, you're running a competition. There's all these different ways to sign it. So it's interesting to see how interpreters take all this in and formulate the appropriate English equivalent. Okay, the next question. Many people believe that skilled users of ASL are experts at lip reading. True or false? How many people think it's true? How many people think it's false? Okay, but we have about 19 or 20.